and Assalamu alaikum everyone. As you all know, my name is Pallusha Nawaz, and I am currently working as project executive at Center for Global and Strategic Studies, Islamabad. On behalf of CGSS and the Embassy of the Republic of Indonesia, I would like to welcome our today's guest, Dr. Muhamad Faisal, and the representatives from the Indonesian Embassy and all our participants who joined us today. Our today's speaker, Dr. Muhamad Faisal, he is the Managing Director for Indonesia. Dr. Faisal will be discussing economy and development strategies of Indonesia. So thank you very much, Dr. Faisal, for taking our time and for joining us today. You may start your presentation now.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear my voice clearly. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Mrs. Pawalsha Nawaz from CGSS, and of course the Indonesian Embassy in Pakistan, in Islamabad, and dear fellow ladies and gentlemen in this Zoom meeting today. It is an honor, it's a pleasure for me to be able to deliver sort of a sharing session, I would say, rather than a lecture, because it is something that I want also to have an input from you from outside regarding Indonesian economic landscape. I'm sure based on the schedule that I've received, that you have previously received or attended the previous sessions, which was focusing more on political landscape in Indonesia. So today I'd like to provide you with a different point of view, which is in the aspect or in the dimension of economy. So first of all, let me please allow me to share my presentation slides. Can you see? Okay, can
yes,
you see
yes, we can see.
So, okay, thank you. So what I would like to say about Indonesian economy and development strategies is more of a broad landscape of Indonesian economy and development strategies, because if we talk about strategies, if we talk about policy, there will be a lot, too many things that I want to share. So I would just like to pick some very strategic and very important economic policy and strategies. And of course, before that, I would like to share with you the landscape of Indonesian economy first, and how it relates, or how it is compared to Pakistan, for example. And just a little bit of illustration here. There are a few pictures that I've shown here. The first one is the picture of the capital city of Indonesia, Jakarta, which is the center of business, and also reflects the services sector in Indonesia, which is growing very rapidly. And I will be also talking about that in my presentation today. And the second picture is about manufacturing industry, which I will also talk about a little bit later. And the third one, if you can guess, this is a palm oil plantation, the largest export commodities from Indonesia, which is worldwide, well known worldwide. I think it's also have been exported to Pakistan for a while. And the last one is, I'm sure that you already known about Bali. It represents our tourism sector, social services sector, and tourism is also growing very rapidly in Indonesia, only because that this current COVID-19 pandemic, that tourism has been badly impacted because of this pandemic, the crisis. Okay, so first, this is the overview of what I want to share with you today. So at least there are nine aspects that I want to share. The first one, the economic structure of Indonesia. And the second one is industrial development, which is the basis for the economic growth for Indonesia. And third is demographic bonus and human resource development. This is also something very strategic that I want to share with you. And still related to human resource, the fourth and the fifth is about poverty alleviation strategy and employment strategy. This is related to still high unemployment in Indonesia until today. And six is about investment strategy. This is increasingly popular in Indonesia following the new law, omnibus law on investment. And also infrastructure development. This is something that I think one of the most obvious, the best achievement that have been achieved by Indonesia in the last more than 5 years. And there's a lot of progress in terms of infrastructure development in the last more than 5 years. And then green economy and low carbon development is something that I think also important to mention, considering its growing importance, especially in the future. And the last one is digital economy. Okay, let's have a look at the economic structure. Actually, Indonesia has some similarities with Pakistan, not only because we are a Muslim majority country, but also both Indonesia and Pakistan is now based on the World Bank categorizations of countries' income is at the middle lower income country. Indonesia is still lower middle income country, even though actually just before the pandemic, we have just break the threshold for upper middle income country. But after the pandemic, we're going back again to lower middle income countries. But you know that Indonesia is one of the G20 in the world. If we look at the gross domestic product, it is placed the 15th in the G20, and even higher if we consider the GDP by purchasing power parity. So this is Indonesia, and Indonesia has achieved $1 trillion US dollars GDP since a few years ago. So it joined the other G20 who has achieved gross domestic product $1 trillion or more. And if you look at the structure of the economy, I think Indonesia and Pakistan has some similarities in the sense that more than half of the economy or GDP is constructed by private consumption. It's slightly different from Pakistan is that the share of investment is also a bit high in Indonesia, a bit large, which is about 32% of the economy. This is the second largest contributor after private consumption, while in Pakistan, private consumption contributes about 78%. So it's even more important, more influential in the economy compared to the Indonesian economy. And if we look at the growth, the GDP growth, the economic growth, in the last 10 years, Indonesia has maintained an economic growth of 6% or above 5% just before the pandemic. But of course, after the COVID-19 pandemic, we also experienced a recession, just like Pakistan and many other countries in the world. But if we look at these achievements, I think Indonesia is one of the fastest growing developing countries in Asia. But I will talk about it later because there are some problems with this that I think is very good to share with you regarding some of the weaknesses and some of the things that have to be improved in our economy. Okay, next. Okay, now after we see the structure of economy, we can also it is also worth mentioning that in terms of income growth, GNI per capita, I have mentioned before that Indonesia is right now in the lower I think it's at the threshold between lower middle income country and upper middle income country based on the World Bank categorization. And we actually have been in this group, in this category, for 23 years, since 1996. So we have just passed the lower income to lower middle income country in 1996. So we've been there for 23 years. And if you look at the other countries here, like India, India is also at the lower middle income country, slightly lower than Indonesia in terms of GNI per capita. But if you look at the other Asian countries like Thailand, China, Malaysia, not to mention Korea, they have more than higher income per capita than Indonesia. But let's look at the last 4 decades, yeah, because all of these countries in the 1960s, we all have more or less the same starting points. We started from a poor country, basically, lower income countries. But the different economic accelerations determine where we are today. Whereas if you can see, Korea right now is pretty much a high income country. Malaysia and China and Thailand right now is in upper middle income country. Indonesia is in the threshold between lower and upper middle income country. So in terms of the growth, in terms of the economic growth accelerations, we are a bit slower compared to the other peer countries in Asia, especially in East Asia. Now, I think it's also worth mention about regional dynamics, economic dynamics in Indonesia. Even though that GDP in Indonesia is actually quite, as I said, it's more than 1 trillion, one of the largest in the world. But the contributor of the economy is mostly concentrated in the island of Java. So almost 60% of GDP is actually contributed by Java. The second one is Sumatra, contributing about 20%. And the last of the populations, the last of the islands, just less than 20%. The Kalimantan, Borneo, Sulawesi, and also Papua. So this regional disparity has been, we are in this kind of situations, not just now, but since more than two decades ago. And this will be worth mention because one of the economic strategy and the change of governance systems that have been experienced in Indonesia, especially after the Asian economic crisis in 1998, is Indonesia has experienced one of the most radical decentralization in the world in 2000. So if you see that in the next slide. Yeah. So since more than 2 decades ago, especially in the year 1999 and 2000, Indonesia has experienced, I'm not sure if the previous speakers have mentioned about this, but Indonesia experienced the Big Bang, the so-called Big Bang decentralization, which has transformed Indonesia from one of the most centralized country in the world to one of the most decentralized country in the world. And this is also one of the most radical decentralization because the devolution of the devolution of authority from the central government is directly to this district and city government, not just from central to the province level, but direct to the district level, the lower hierarchy in the governance system in Indonesia. And it entails most of the authority of the central government, except for 5 functions that include foreign relations, religions, security, etc. But this is what happened in Indonesia since 20 years ago. After the fall of the New Order regime, after the fall of Suharto, which is a very, very famous Indonesian leaders who have been in power for almost 32 years, since 1966. And if you're going back to that again, to the previous slides, between 2000, after the decentralization policy until today, we can see that there is not much difference in terms of the GDP shares between Java and outside Java, between one island to the other. It means that even though many of the governance system, much of the aspects of the governance system has been decentralized, the growth of the economic growth in the outer islands, in the islands outside Java, is not fast enough to catch up with Java as the central of the economic activities in Indonesia. So this is one of the things that I want to share with you. So, and because of this problem, Indonesia has recently Indonesian government under the President Joko Widodo has recently decided to move the Indonesian capital to somewhere in the middle of the country, which is in the island of Kalimantan. One of the reasons is because of to distribute the economic activities, the economic pies, not just concentrated in Java, but also to be distributed to outside Java. This is one of the new policy imposed by the current government, and then it is just recently decided just before the pandemic, and I think the construction of the new capital city is starting this year, and it is targeted to complete this construction. It is targeted to complete in 2024, in the next 3 and 4 years. So I think it's honestly saying that it's quite ambitious projects to move the capital city from Jakarta to East Kalimantan, to the East Borneo in just 3 or 4 years. Let's now move at the second aspects, which is industrial development. This is very important because industrial sector or manufacturing industry is the largest contributor to the Indonesian economy, and also one of the largest contributor in terms of employment, in terms of workforce. And this is just illustration. In the manufacturing industry in Indonesia is concentrated in some subsectors. The first picture is textiles. Textiles has been Indonesian prioritized manufacturing sector since a few decades ago, since even early to 1980s until today. But right now, especially in the last 20 years, Indonesia has also developed manufacturing industry, especially in the automotive sector. And Indonesia has also started to also export cars and motorcycles, and also parts of automotive vehicles to the other countries. Now, the issues here in Indonesia in terms of the manufacturing sector development is that if you can see in the 1960s, especially after the fall of the previous regime, before the new order, before Suharto, before 1967, Indonesia has also experienced a very, very serious, terrible crisis in the 1965. But after that, after the change of the regime, starting 1967 until 1998, which is another crisis that have been experienced by Indonesia. So during the 30 plus years, Indonesia experienced high economic growth under this regime, and the so-called authoritarian regime of Suharto, new order regime. And the peak or the highest economic growth, if you can see here, is almost 10% in the 1980s. And Indonesia maintained also to have high economic growth until just before the economic crisis, 1998. And the second one, let's also have a look at the growth of the manufacturing sector. it is clear here that manufacturing sector grew higher than the GDP growth. It can be as high as double digit, 22% in 1980s. It means that the Indonesian economy back then was driven mainly by the manufacturing sector. It's the leading sector for the economic growth. But that has changed after the Asian economic crisis in 1998. So it's a very obvious difference after the Asian economic crisis, that the growth of the manufacturing industry is no longer as high as that before the Asian economic crisis. And if you can see here, even in after 2004, in the year 2004, the manufacturing sector started to grow even lower than the GDP growth, meaning that it's no longer the main driver of Indonesian economic growth, main driver of Indonesian economy. And so since then also, the Indonesian economic growth has never been as high as that before the Asian economic crisis. During the 2000s, we can reach up to 6%. But right after that, recently, especially in the past 5 years, the economic growth is stagnant at the rate of 5%. Yeah? And the manufacturing sector grew even lower than the GDP growth. This is one of the problems, because manufacturing is actually used to be the leading sector that drives the Indonesian economy. Because it's not as strong as it used to be, then the Indonesian economic growth also don't grow very strong. And on your right, you can see also that the contribution of the manufacturing sector to the GDP is also declining from the peak in 2004, about 28%, to just 20%, or even lower now, and this is so-called deindustrialization. If we compare with some of the East Asian countries, we have different story in terms of the path of industrialization. Some of the successful East Asian countries like Korea and China, they have maintained to have a high economic growth, led by the high growth of manufacturing sectors for decades. So you can see that Korea and China, that's why if you relate to the previous slides of GNI per capita, they have grown faster than Indonesia, then move up to the next level of income category because of this, because of the industrialization, the consistent industrialization in Korea and China. So as a comparison, if we look at from 1961 to year 2020, Korea, the income growth per Korea has multiplied 326 times, China 139 times, and Indonesia only 75 times during that period, I think almost 60 years. So this is what happened. And also in terms of job creation by the manufacturing sector, it's also stagnated in the past few decades. And if you compare with other Asian countries like Malaysia, Vietnam, and the Philippines, Indonesia actually a bit lower than Malaysia, and now also lower than Vietnam in terms of the share of employment in manufacturers. Indonesia also only is a bit higher than Philippines in this case. And now let's also have a look at the export performance. We can see here Indonesia is up there. The green one is actually these exports based on primary product and manufacturing products. The green one is the primary product exports, and the red one is manufacturing goods. You can see that from 1995 until today, 2017, the the proportion of the primary product actually not that much different or even higher. So manufacturing goods, the export of manufacturing goods, even larger in the previous decades, in the past few decades compared to today. And this is a different story if you compare with Vietnam, for example. Yeah, Vietnam used to be a country where also who also um, dependent upon the exports of primary products, but right now Vietnam is pretty much a country with a strong, very strong exports in manufacturing. There's also the same. If you look at the structure of the manufacturing goods exports, you can see that much of the Indonesian exports actually uh, in the category of labor intensive and resource intensive manufacturers. We have achieved some, there are some achievement in terms of the growth of medium and skill and technology intensive manufacturers because of the automotive industry. You can see here in the yellow one, it's actually the medium skill, which is uh, entails automotive industry. But the growth of the high skill and technology intensive which has the higher value added like electronics, etc., is still very much stagnant or a bit declining. You can see that the difference with to Vietnam over the years. Vietnam, the proportion of the labor intensive products exports is declining, but the proportion of the high skill and technology intensive manufacturers is growing in the last few decades. So one of the things that has influenced the performance of exports in Indonesia is because of this, because Indonesia is pretty much dependent on commodity, on raw materials. We are a natural resource rich countries. We used to depend in the 1980s. Indonesia used to depend on oil and gas exports, and also from the logging industries, from the forestry. But then in the 1990s up to the early 2000s, especially after the industrialization, the first one is the left, the top left here is the coal. The coal is the one of the commodities that has has increased in especially in importance, especially in the 2000s after the decentralization, after the Asian economic crisis. Apart from coal, you can see also in the bottom left is CPO or palm oil. Now, palm oil is the largest non-oil and gas exports in Indonesia. So now, if you can see the top two of Indonesian exports commodities, that is palm oil and coal. And the last one is you can see on the bottom right, it's actually the Freeport-McMoRan mining in Papua, which is the largest gold mining in the world. And we also still depend on these commodities in terms of exports. So that's about industrial development. Now let's have a look at the demographic structure and human resource development. So let's have a look at the right one first. It's a dependency ratio. It's related to the structure of Indonesian population based on their age and productivity. Dependency ratio means that the ratio or the comparisons between the productive population, which is the young population, young and productive population, compared to the non-productive, either children or elderly. So you can see here in the dependency ratio in Indonesia is declining, so as Pakistan, but right now the dependency ratio in Indonesia is still is lower than Pakistan, meaning that it's the period where Indonesia should have high potential in terms of accelerating its economic growth, because the proportion of the productive population is so large that compared to the non-productive population, it's pretty much the dependency ratio is low. And this is what we normally called, what we know as demographic bonus. And demographic bonus in Indonesia is estimated to be in the period starting this last year in 2020 up to 2040. And the peak of the demographic bonus is in 2030, in the next 10 years. This is believed as a window of opportunity for our country to grow, to catch up with the more advanced country in terms of economic development and human development. Okay, now let's have a look at this. This is the demographic structure by age and gender. This is what we call that Indonesia is right now. The productive population, the young population is much higher than the non-productive, because the elderly is still very low compared to the young population. And if we look at Pakistan, I think it's even large young population here, productive population compared to the elderly. But the non-productive, the very young, which is the children here, is also pretty much high also compared to Indonesia. Now let's compare, for example, the country which has experienced aging population, like Japan. They have different demographic structure to both Indonesia and Pakistan, in the sense that the older populations tend to be a bit more dominant than the younger population here. So that's why the economic situations also is very much related to the demographic structure, because of not only in terms of employment problems, but also in terms of how to achieve a higher economic growth of a country. Now, relating to that, having said that, Indonesia has imposed a new strategy, or a new policy in the last few decades. Especially, it started in 2003, which is a 9-year compulsory education to improve the quality of the human resource in terms of education. And there's also a law since 2003 that that demands or requires the government expenditure, 20% of government expenditure should be allocated for education sector. So this applied to not only to the central government, but also to province and district governments. But in reality, it is more difficult to implement this policy at the province and district level because of the fiscal constraints. But it has been sustained at the central level since 2003. And as a result, we can see here, for example, the Human Development Index in Indonesia is growing consistently in the last decade. And now our Human Development Index is about 71, yeah, which is considered middle to high in terms of Human Development Index. Another aspect of human resource is actually how the Indonesia alleviate poverty. So first of all, let's have a look at the poverty structure in Indonesia. Now, Indonesia poverty rate, of course, after the pandemic, it's growing, it's increased. But just before the pandemic, poverty rate in Indonesia has reached single digit in 2016 to become 9%. It used to be double digits always, and typically, if you compare between the rural and urban poverty, the rural poverty is higher compared to the urban poverty in Indonesia. But if we look at the structure of the poverty in Indonesia, The problem is not just those who live below the poverty line, which is currently over 25 million people in Indonesia. But you can see also there are some people who are a bit above, slightly above the poverty line, but they are very prone to become poor or nearly poor. And these people, this bunch of people, actually, there are a lot more than those who live below the poverty line, which is about 67 million people. So both these categories, the below poverty line and the almost or the prone to poor categories, they are now included in the social protection and also the social assistance in Indonesia called as bansos. And this is one of the strategy of the Indonesian government to alleviate poverty. And if we look at the comparison with the some other Asian countries, Indonesia is actually a bit lag behind compared to our neighbors, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam, in terms of the level of poverty. Indonesia is still better than Pakistan in terms of the poverty level. But if you look at the slope or the growth in Pakistan, the decline in poverty rate is actually very sharp. So it is very good progress for Pakistan as well. And on the other aspects, in terms of economic disparity, reflected by Gini ratio, actually Pakistan is much better than Indonesia in terms of the economic disparity. Because if you look at here, the Gini ratio in Indonesia starting below or lower than Pakistan in the 1990s, but then has increased. So right now it's about 37.8 points, while Pakistan is only 31 points. So this is the program, the strategy that I have mentioned before, implemented by the government. One of the strategy to alleviate poverty is the social protection program. So social protection program consisting of the regular social assistance and also non-regular social assistance. But apart from this, actually, there are also some other programs still under the social protection program that includes health, etc., which is considered not as a social assistance itself, but also includes like social insurance. But I'm not going to talk about that. So regular social assistance, some examples are conditional cash transfers, which is called Program Keluarga Harapan, and also non-cash food subsidy. So there are food subsidy and also cash transfers, but conditional. What is conditional? It's actually integration between providing the poor with cash, but with the condition that the beneficiaries, they have to enroll their children to school. So with this, we hope that those who receive the cash transfers, they also enroll their children to school, so that they can they can improve their livelihood, actually, the family in the future, and they can get out of the poverty permanently, which is the severe poverty, because of the education. This is the idea why there is a conditional cash transfers in Indonesia. And after the COVID-19 pandemic, there are a lot more non-regular social assistance, not only food subsidy, not only conditional cash transfers, but also main basic food subsidy, electricity subsidy. There are a lot more. And because we provided a big amount of money for economic recovery as a result of the pandemic since 2020. I'm sorry, this is in Bahasa Indonesia, just to show you that the magnitude and also the variety of social assistance program in Indonesia today, which covers, as I said, about 67 plus 25 million people, almost about more than 100 million population in Indonesia, and the magnitude and the variation can range from providing basic staple foods to electricity subsidy to village fund and also employment subsidy, and also the cash transfers itself. This what have been implemented in Indonesia in the last 10 years. Now, after poverty, we also need to have a look at the employment, because ideally the strategy to alleviate poverty does not depend on just giving money or providing cash to the poor. We have to make the poor empowered by providing a decent jobs for them. So that's why that's how the employment strategy come into the picture. So if we look at the Indonesian unemployment rate in the last 10 years, the open unemployment rate has been declining. So right now it's about 5%, but after the pandemic, of course, it's growing up to become 7%. So right now there are about I think about 7 million people. Just before the pandemic, there were 7 million people who are unemployed in Indonesia. But interestingly, if we look at the structure of unemployed people by age and also by education, it is not those who have lower education that has increased in terms of the unemployment, but actually those who have the higher education, like the senior high school, those graduate from senior high school, and also the graduates of university. The unemployment in this category is increasing in Indonesia. It's very, very interesting. While those who has lower education, primary education, for example, tends to be declining in the last 10 years. And also by age, if you look at by age, unemployment is growing among the young population. So this is what we call a young and educated unemployment is growing in Indonesia. There are several issues related to this. The first one is the skills mismatch, which is the skills and the level education, the level of education that is produced by the educational institutions in Indonesia does not match the demand of the industry. So that's why currently, since 1999 up to the next 5 years, one of the priorities of the Indonesian government is to increase the quality of human resource. One of them is by focusing on vocational education, and also to bridge the gap between demand and supply of workforce of employment in Indonesia. But apart from that, one of the reasons for this this increase in young and educated unemployment is also because of limited formal job creation, especially formal job creation, because the higher the higher education the people can reach, they tend to pick the job that is more suitable for them, the decent job, which is provided by formal jobs. Since the formal job creation is limited, then they have to, these people who have higher education, they have to compete more strictly. While those who are not very, very well educated, they can work actually, well, anything. They don't have to work in the formal employment, formal job. They can also do informal jobs. So that's why there are an increase in young and educated unemployment, because the limited of formal job creation in Indonesia. And one of the aspects that has also been happening in Indonesia in the last 10 years is that in terms of the urban and rural population, now since especially since 2013, since 8 years ago, more than half of the population in Indonesia live in urban areas. We're no longer a country where most of our population live in the rural area. I remember when I was a kid. I remember when I was a kid that my teacher also always taught me that Indonesia is an agricultural country because most of our populations are in the agriculture, live in the rural areas and um, uh, conducting or depending on the agricultural sector. But now it's not the case anymore. So urban, because of urbanization, most of Indonesian people, or majority of Indonesian people right now live in urban areas, and it creates some issues, so development issues in the urban areas in Indonesia. So because of this urbanization that has been rapidly happening in Indonesia. And where are those people, the migrants from the rural areas to urban people live, and what do they do? What do they do actually? This is an illustration of what some of the migrants of the from rural areas to that can be found in Indonesian cities, in even in larger cities. This is in not only in Jakarta but also I think in some of this is in Bandung and Yogyakarta. Some of them, the livelihoods, some of them, they have to become street food sellers, which is the informal sector, and become a motorcycle taxi or ojek. We call it ojek here in Indonesia, drivers, and also tricycle drivers, and also street food sellers here. And these are the one of the urban issues in Indonesia, the increasing informal sector in Indonesia, because they are poorly regulated by the city governments across different cities in Indonesia. And most of these people, if you look at the scale of their business, many of them run very, very small business, which is called micro entrepreneurs, and they are in the informal sector. So if you look at the share of the number of workers, 97% of the Indonesian workers in right now is they are in the scale of small and medium enterprises. Only 3% of the Indonesian workers work actually in a large company. And these micro, small, and medium enterprises, firms in Indonesia, they contribute about 60% or almost 60% of the Indonesian GDP. So it's very, very important. And that's why SMEs has become the main focus of the Indonesian government, especially after the economic pandemic, as a response to the crisis, to recover from the crisis. There are many programs that aim to empower the small and medium enterprises in Indonesia. And I think I can just skip this. This is what happened in the urban areas, and on the other side, this is what happened in the rural areas. So because of the limited opportunity provided in the rural areas, and the livelihood is harder in terms of the income. You can see farmers' terms of trade in Indonesia at the top left and top right is actually not far from 100, meaning that their income is actually very, very limited to support their daily needs. And if we look at the farm workers by age in some of the provinces in Indonesia, they tend to be older year by year. So right now we are in the situation where those who work in the agricultural sector becomes older and older. So the young population, the young generation tends to leave the rural areas to go to the cities, and to find better opportunities, to find more opportunities in the urban areas. So it's aging farmers in Indonesia, and I think it's not good in terms of if we consider the need, our need to, you know, food security, because the more people leaving the agricultural sector, I think the more prone we are to food insecurity. So what is the response of the Indonesian government? So since 2015, 6 years ago, Indonesian government under the current president, Joko Widodo, stipulates the so-called Indonesian village law on village. And one of the key features of that is providing every village with money, with fund, as much as 1 billion rupiah per year, every year, village fund, directly. The village used to also receive money from the central government, but through hierarchical levels, yeah, from province to and then to district level, and then to many layers and up to the village. Right now, with this, under this law, every village have receive direct transfers from the central government, as much as 1 billion. And this has been implemented for 6 years, and there are some achievements in these areas, in the villages, in terms of productivity of the village. Especially, it has been successful in Java. So the success of this program is not uniform. It's not uniform across different areas in Indonesia. It is more successful in Java, but outside Java, especially in the eastern part of Indonesia, there are some problems with this village fund. Now, in investment strategy, this is very popular right now in Indonesia because, first of all, because before I'm talking about the new law, omnibus law, the rationale or the reason why Indonesia is very concerned about this is actually because manufacturing competitiveness in Indonesia is declining, and now it's lower than peer Asian countries. Like, for example, if you can see the rank of manufacturing competitiveness in the Asia Pacific, Indonesia is placed 15, below Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, Singapore, and even below India, your Pakistan's neighbor. Now, based on this, what are the aspects that has inhibit manufacturing competitiveness or investment competitiveness in Indonesia? These are the most problematic factors. First is corruption. The second one is inefficient government bureaucracy. And then some problems in terms of access to financing. And also the fourth one, infrastructure, etc., etc. So corruption is the biggest hurdles to investment in Indonesia, and that's have impacted on its competitiveness in the manufacturing sector. And this has also been very popular, the industrial relocation trend from China to Southeast Asia, because of the economic transition in China. There are lots of investors who used to invest in China. They look outside China to be more competitive. They look for other countries, and especially Southeast Asia. But most of these companies, most of these investors, they look not to Indonesia. They look more to Indonesian neighbors like Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, Myanmar, and Indonesia is just the very least choice compared to these neighboring countries. So it reflects the competitiveness of Indonesia as a destination for investment. And that's the reason why omnibus law on investment has been decreed in 2020, just last year. It is called Undang-Undang Cipta Kerja. It contains 11 clusters. It entails 79 laws, and then ranging from the need to simplify the business permit, up to SME protection, ease of doing business, research and innovation, until land procurement. So these are the laws is intended to attract investment, because some of the problems in Indonesia investment is actually the regulations, the um, unharmon the not unharmonized regulations between central and local governments, and also different sectors. And by this omnibus law, the new law, it is hoped that these impediments, these uh, uh, inconsistent regulation can be solved. But of course, it has created a lot of reactions from the public, because of especially the workers, the labor union, because many have criticized this law because it is considered to be at the cost of the laborers, at the cost of the local people, and at the cost of environment as well. So there are some criticism, there are some protests, even very good protests, a very large protest last year when this omnibus law was announced by the government. And the seventh is actually about the infrastructure development. This is very important, and I think this is one of the best achievements that the Indonesian government has had in the in the last 7 years. So the idea, the rationale, the reason why infrastructure development was boosted in the last 7 years is because, first, because the logistics performance of Indonesia, which is very inefficient compared to many other countries, including its neighbors, China, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. And as a comparison, as an illustration here on your right, is the comparison of shipping costs from Jakarta to other cities overseas is actually cheaper than shipping costs to other cities, domestic cities, the same city, other cities in Indonesia. For example, from Jakarta to Singapore, it costs only $150, for example. But from Jakarta to Makassar, which is another island, the city in another island, is 1,400. So it's almost 10 times more expensive than the shipping cost to Singapore. The same is true, for example, from Jakarta to Shanghai, which is actually longer or farther than Singapore from Jakarta, but only $200 compared to, for example, the shipping costs from Jakarta to Medan in Sumatra, 1,700, which is almost 10 times more expensive. This is an illustration how inefficient and the logistical costs in Indonesia. You know that Indonesia is an archipelagic country, so logistics, especially shipping, is very important in Indonesia as an archipelagic country. So infrastructure development has been prioritized in Indonesia since 2015. The annual state budget allocated for infrastructure increased very significantly since 2015. It used to be only about 154 trillion rupiah in 2013-2014 to over 400 in 2018, and most of these are funded by the government and also the private and also the SOEs. Sorry, the private sector, so the central government and private sector, and the SOEs, the boosting infrastructure development in Indonesia. And it can consist of different kinds of infrastructure, from airports, toll roads, to trains, and to post border, and also the dam, and many others. This is an example, for example, that there's a new toll road in Bali, which is over the sea, connecting the airport and also the capital city of Bali, which is in Denpasar. And there is also at the bottom central here is actually the cross border between Indonesia and Malaysia. It used to be there's no such a big building like this before. There's no such thing. Very simple, and the road is also very poor. But right now the government built not only the building for immigration, but also there are they build market here, and also they build the supporting infrastructure like the roads. So that was infrastructure, and now we move into the green economic development. This is very important because, as I said, Indonesia has been dependent very heavily on commodities, and one of the consequences is that there has been a very rapid deforestation happened in Indonesia, especially in the island of Borneo. Borneo is very central because it is one of the islands in Indonesia where forest has been used to be very still dominant in the island. But right now you can see that the change since 1950 it's pretty much covered with forest, and then it declines very persistently in 1985, and right now in 2020 only less than half of the island covered by forest. So there has been massive natural resource exploitation, especially in the outer island, the island outside Java in Indonesia. So it's a very serious issue, and not only deforestation. There's also an issue of energy use, because Indonesia has been very depending very heavily on oil and gas. Yeah? So the chart here showing that the production of oil in Indonesia, we used to be a net exporter of oil, but right now Indonesia is no longer a net exporter. We are now a net importer of oil, and the production of oil declining consistently in the last 20 years. On the contrary, the consumption for oil is increasing. So we are now a net importer, and the import for oil imports in Indonesia is also growing because of the growing consumption. So the transition towards more renewable energy, away from fossil fuel, away from oil, dependence on oil is very big issue in Indonesia. And right now the renewable energy, if we can see here, only still contributes 1% of the energy consumption in Indonesia, compared to, for example, oil, 44%, still very large. And that's why one of the strategy of Indonesian government right now is the biodiesel mandatory program, which is biodiesel means to mix the oil with a certain percentage with palm oil, because we are palm oil surplus, and it can produce the energy source up to be 100, means that 100% palm oil. And this has been consistently implemented in Indonesia in order to reduce oil oil consumption, and reduce also oil imports on oil, and also to absorb the surplus in palm oil in Indonesia. So this is one of the strategy in terms of the energy use. And the last one, digital economy, is very rapidly increasing in Indonesia because of the number of internet users, also very increasing very rapidly. Infrastructure for digitalization is also growing. And if you can see here that internet penetration doesn't only it's not only high in the urban areas, but also in the rural areas. And if you look at the number of cell phone users in Indonesia, is right now about 338 million people, which is even more than the Indonesian population itself. So it's growing very rapidly in the last 10 years. And right now Indonesia has had some of the unicorns. Unicorns means that the startup, the digital startup that has valued over 1 billion US dollars. There are four in Indonesia, which is Gojek in the transportation sector. This is the largest, and the valuation is more than 10 billion US dollars. It was founded in 2010. And the second largest is Tokopedia. This is e-commerce. Valuation is 7 billion. And the third one is Traveloka. This is it's traveling, digital traveling platform. The valuation is about 4 billion. And Bukalapak is also e-commerce, the fourth one, with valuation 2.5 billion. So there are four unicorns in Indonesia, reflecting that the digital economy and also e-commerce, etc. in Indonesia is growing very rapidly because of the market potentials and also the development of the infrastructure. I think that's just some highlights of the Indonesian economy and strategy. It's not thank you. I think I would like to end with that. So I hope there will be question and answers later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Faisal, for your very comprehensive presentation. We will now be moving on to our interactive session. And I would like to request all our candidates, if you have any question, kindly raise your hand. I will unmute you and you can ask your question. Okay, first we have a question from Muhammad Ramzan. I am unmuting you. You can ask your question.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you're audible.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, Sir Muhamad Faisal, for giving a very comprehensive, detailed presentation on economic issues of Indonesia. During your presentation, you have explained that the transfers of money or revenue from the central government to the at the local level is directly from the center, without involving any provincial government. And how this is managed when I mean, what criteria is adopted while transferring any amount of money from the center to the local level, because center is far away from the local government, and they actually I don't think okay, how they will come to know about the development issues and how much amount is required over there, since you have also said that 20% of the government spendings are also spent on education. And how is this calculated, keeping in view the overall development scenario of different parts of the country? So will you please elaborate it? Thank you very much.
Sorry. Okay, I think I have to answer. Sorry. Okay. Thank you for the question, Mr. Ramzan. So this is a very interesting thing to know how the central government money is transferred to the local governments. Actually, there are many components of the government budget that is transferred to the local level. The first one, we call it as the Dana Alokasi Umum, or General Allocation Fund. We have a formula. The General Allocation Fund is actually distributed to each of the province and district government based on their capability to finance themselves. For example, if the potential or the ability to generate income, their own income, is low, then the general allocation fund transferred from the central to the local government is higher, and there is a formula for that. And there is also a component, for example, of natural resource share. So of course, not every local government in Indonesia is natural resource rich. So there are some rich local governments, and there is also some poor local government in terms of the natural resource. So those local governments who are have natural resource, rich of natural resource, they can receive a good share of the natural resource in their region from the central government. So they have additional, they will get additional funds from central government because of the natural resource that I have in the regions. On the contrary, the regions or the local governments who do not have much natural resource, they will also receive less natural resource share from the central government. And the third one, this is what we call a special allocation fund. Special allocation fund is actually an amount of fund which is in terms of the value is usually a lot less than the general allocation fund, which is allocated to the central to the local government because of nationally strategic programs. For example, if there is for example, a conflict region somewhere, for example, in eastern part of Indonesia, there will be a special allocation program, for example, for conflict resolutions and also people's empowerment in the area. The same is true, for example, if there is a natural disaster, for example, not recently, for example, in Sulawesi, and there's some damage, physical damage there in the area, and the government can allocate special allocation fund to that specific local government to build from or to recover from the natural disaster. There's some of the features, but of course the value or the share of each of these components has not been well, or what can I say, has not been well done. It's not necessarily makes everybody happy. Yeah, some of the usually if I go to the some of the natural resource regions, they usually also complains about how small they share from the central government. They feel that they have to receive even more because of their contribution in terms of the natural resource extracted from the regions. But these are the things that have been implemented in Indonesia. How the government is transferred the money to the province and district level. And also you mentioned about the 20% allocation for education. So this is quite tricky because the reason why the law on education that requires 20% of the central government budget allocated for education was based on the poor performance in terms of the human resource quality and education back then, more than 20 years ago. But then the government then come up with the and also the, of course, the legislative bodies come up with the idea to fix the to make a fixed allocation for education 20%. There are some advantages and disadvantages in this, of course, because with the fixed 20% percentage for education, it means that it will reduce the allocation for other purposes, for other sectors, for other needs. Yeah, not only for health but also for infrastructure, etc. So the fiscal space for things for matters outside education is also becomes very a bit limited. So that's why. But it is hoped that it will be compensated by better education. But there's also some criticisms on this because, in fact, the quality of education, the improvement of the education quality is not as as quick as the big amount of money allocated for education, because of this. For example, there are still many schools in Indonesia at the local level who are still poor in terms of the construction, in terms of the quality of the buildings. The bureaucratic issues and efficiency in terms of the use of the fund for education is also another issue, and it's a big issue because there are some gap between the central government bureaucracy and also the province and local level bureaucracy, especially when we consider the decentralization, because right now the district and the district level they are more autonomy in terms of how they want to spend their money, allocated or transferred from the central government. Does that answer your question? I hope that's answered your question. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for your expert analysis. And with that, we will be concluding our today's session. At the end, I would like to thank our today's speaker, Dr. Faisal, yes, who took out time for us and who joined us and presented a very comprehensive presentation to all the participants and to all the participants who joined us today. And thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.